Hi everyone, this is Dr. Clint Lanier, Assistant College Professor at New Mexico State University, and today we are going to talk about reports. Now, there are a lot of different reports out there, so this is going to be a general kind of conversation. If you are in my technical communication class, you need to read the specific chapters on each of the various types of reports, analytical reports, and so forth. But we're going to talk a little bit generally about them. First of all, we need to understand the purpose of a report. It is to provide the relevant details of an activity to a specific audience. And that's a very, very broad definition. I understand that. And the question that might be coming to your mind is, Dr. Lanier, what the heck are the relevant details and who the heck is the audience? Well, that depends on the circumstances of the report. For example, if your instructor asks you for a report, chances are that the instructor is interested in your methodology and the results because they'll be checking this against standard methodology and results, right? If your instructor assigns you a report, and for example, your lab instructor, okay, in biology or chemistry, or whatever it happens to be, they already know the circumstances of why you're doing the report. They just want to make sure that you understand the methodology, and they want to check your results against what the results should be. Now, if your boss asks you for a report, chances are that he or she is interested in the conclusions or the implications that you come up with at the end of the report, not necessarily what is kind of in the middle. So as the circumstances change, the purpose and what goes into the report actually changes quite a bit. But as always, what you need to ask yourself is, how much does the reader already know about the subject? Okay, how much background, details, etc., to include just about everything does the reader need? So, for example, does he or she need the problem history, the subject history, the research question or problem that you're investigating, information about the topic itself? Does he or she need an explanation of what the methods, the equipments, the theories, and the formulas that you used are? An explanation of the results, the reasons for the implications drawn, or the conclusions made. Understand how much he or she already knows about this stuff, and this will help give you an idea of what information and how much information you should include. Now, luckily, reports follow a very specific structure. It's called MRAP. They start with an introduction, and then they move to methods, and then they move to results, then finally analysis of the results, and then finally a discussion or conclusion or recommendation at the very end. All of these are very, very important, and you must not leave any of these out. So you should include methods. Even if your methodology is as simple as, I looked up the information on a couple of websites. Well, that's your methodology. And even if your results are as simple as a data dump. And in fact, let me talk about that for just a moment. Your results are exactly that, okay? You are not discussing your results at this time. You are simply doing a data dump. So in other words, this is what I found, blah. And you just put it out there. You don't do any interpretation. You don't try to break it down. That is what the next chapter, or the next section, analysis, is for. In the analysis section, you are actually providing some type of commentary or discussion about the results that you found, why they're like they are, or what they mean, what the implications are for each of the results. And then finally, your discussion or conclusion wraps it up, or your recommendation wraps it all up and provides some type of context and some kind of final outcome for what you found. Okay? Each part of this is designed to help you structure the information and to help your readers find that information. So your introduction needs to have very specific information in it, information about the topic, about the subject, the research question, the background, so on and so forth, depending on how much your reader already knows. You need to use tech writing strategies that you've already been discussing, okay? You need to make the information relevant to the reader, make the information easy to find, and make the information easy to understand. So how do you make the information easy to find, easy to understand? You need to include section headings, for example, for methods, for results, for analysis. Each of those should have a section heading followed by the information. You can also use graphics. You should use graphics to display your results. For example, you could display them in a table or a chart or a graph. That makes information easy to find, easy to understand for the reader, okay? Use as many of these strategies as you can to help the reader quickly find and use information. Make the information relevant to the reader as well. So the first thing to do is identify the reader. Who is it for? Understand the reader's characteristics. Match the information to your reader's needs, wants, expectations, and knowledge. and then again, make the information easy to understand, easy to find and understand. So making the information relevant to the reader. Once you know who the reader is, once you understand how much information they already have, it's easy to write the proper information for them. And then making information easy to understand. As I said, use strategies to help readers quickly find information. So section headings, use subsections, subsection headings, table of contents, transitions from one section to another, introduction for each section and subsection, okay? And then making the information easy to understand. So using visuals and graphics, break information into smaller and less complex parts, be concise with the information, use lists and so forth, okay? Other parts, and these aren't typically things that you'll have to do, certainly not in this class, but other pieces of a typical report, you'll have a cover page, you might have an abstract, table of contents, you might have an executive summary. An executive summary is as it says, it's a summary of the entire thing, probably a synopsis of the entire report into about 2 pages. Back matter could include references, a glossary for terms, any appendices, and finally an index so they can quickly find information. And this depends on how long the reports really are. For the purposes of this class, you might have the references, and that's probably about it, okay? And generally speaking, those are reports. You're going to need to refer to your book, to the specific chapters for analytical reports and situation reports and so forth for the assignments.